There we go. Awesome. All right, welcome all. So from last 2 weeks ago, we kind of talked about the 4 kind of tasks or things that we needed to get done with the CLE before it gets reviewed. And those were kind of discovery. And we talked about potentially using like a well-known directory, some kind of stuff there. Don't know if we're planning to do that for V1. Second was vouching, third parties making claims on behalf of someone else. The third was the sharding and pagination, which I think we really would like to do. And then the fourth was just going through a bunch of examples. And I have one of these examples to go over today, Bootstrap. And then we also actually need to decide whether we want to do mutable and immutable events. So big list, but so once Jordan joins, I think I would like to discuss kind of the mutable versus immutable. But while he's not here, I would like to I'd like to go over identifiers, if that makes sense with you guys, and look at one of these scenarios. Okay. Okie dokie. So, so this is the example, Bootstrap example. And if I just go back here, I also added recently information about the JSON schema to the specification. And so I think I remember Steve saying, pick the latest draft version of the JSON schema. And I think 2012 is the latest.
Correct.
Yeah, and so I added some information here about what the URL for the schema would look like. And mentioning that the schema field really serves 2 purposes. One is actually using JSON schema for validation, of course. And the second is version signaling. So if a tool decides to read a CLE document, it needs to know what version of the CLE it is so that it can parse it correctly. And so that's what I was thinking, at least as using this schema field also to signal the version to use for parsing. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So I just added this recently in the spec. It'll have to get updated, but so one of the things we ran into yesterday was that we don't really define an identifier in the schema right now, right? Like for this CLE, for example, Bootstrap, we may have a whole bunch of identifiers like this, right? That would map to the Bootstrap component. And I posted this in the Slack channel, but there's kind of two ways I think that we could go about it. One is that you have an identifiers field at the top of the CLE. And then as you get new identifiers, possible identifiers, you add them. And then I think the component renamed event schema would also, I don't know the best way of doing this, but would also be a source of of a new identifier, right? Because when we rename it, we also add an identifier, right, of the new component. So like tooling would be able to read the component renamed events, or it would be able to read these identifiers list for aliases. And the second way, if you didn't want a whole list of identifiers up here, like maybe we just have one identifier, I don't know. You could add like a component alias added event, like this.
That's get that. Yeah, I understand that. That's gonna get a little
Mm-hmm.
from an academic perspective. I think that's likely the best, but from a pragmatic perspective,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I don't
You mean
think
this one?
that'll right. Academically,
Okay.
that's probably the best, but in the
Right.
real world, yeah, it's gonna make looking up things much more difficult, I think.
Mm.
What are your thoughts?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think I think that a component alias is not really an event. Like it's not new data. It's like a piece of data that you're associating with this component, but it's not necessarily something that's like useful for you to know. Oh, they added an, I don't know, maybe you would want to know when an alias was added. I mean, that might be useful information. Hmm.
Maybe. I just don't I don't
Mm-hmm.
think it's in terms of a PLM event,
Mm-hmm.
I don't
Mm-hmm.
think that
Yeah,
qualifies.
right. Yeah, so I would be totally, I mean, I think it makes sense to me to add identifiers up here. Um, the other thing that we run into is that technically you could have multiple CLEs, right? Maybe from different companies. And one company says, this is my identifier, and another says, no, this is my identifier, right? And there's no way of preventing that technically, right?
Right.
You could have two identifiers existing in two CLEs.
Yep.
So I don't know if there's any way of avoiding that. Just the nature of you know, having decentralized identity.
Right. Um
So, and then also Salve mentioned using repology.
uh,
Um, have you ever heard of repology?
no, I
Repology.
don't think so.
Um, so it is, it's like catalog for software projects and versions and releases and things like that. And the hard thing about aliasing is that a lot of the times the aliases will be different based on its distribution method. So you'll
Mhm.
have like one for npm, one for NuGet, and it will have a different Perl for each of them, right?
Yep.
And so this tries to catalog different distribution methods, and like so you could create Perls out of this, but the coverage is just too spotty. Like I've never been able to use it. So it will these aliases will just have to be something I think that manufacturers like add and update themselves from my experience.
Okay. Now, the identifiers don't have to be like globally. available, right? Are globally unique. They're really, really unique for that CLE feed, correct?
Yes. But yeah, there's no way of really preventing an identifier from being or making sure that an identifier is globally unique, I think,
Right.
unfortunately.
Yeah, unless
But
you used UIDs for everything, which I mean,
yeah,
but yeah, okay.
yep. And there's no centralized, store of all CLEs that are published either. So
Right,
yeah,
right,
yeah.
right, right.
So yeah. So yeah, that's what I was thinking for identifiers. What else do we have? Uh, um, the other thing, I was wondering your guys' thoughts on for like open source projects,
Mhm.
rather than having a list of like events, there's a possibility that you could create almost like a support policy that's dynamic. So for a given project, a lot of open sources are like, if you're not on the latest minor version, you're not going to get any updates at
Sure.
all, no security
Right.
patches, stuff like that, right? And some might do it for the last two minor versions, some might do it for the last one minor version, like the latest minor version. And you can effectively calculate the support for any given version. You would just need basically a definition of the policy
Mhm.
and all releases in order to like effectively calculate it. So,
Right.
but you could avoid having to generate events for each of them.
Hold on a second. What happens if there's been a rename, such that like one event basically is before the rename, so one version is before the rename,
Mhm.
and the second one is after. So
For
basically,
this,
yes. So for that particular example,
mhm,
um, the last major, the older of the two that are still supported actually has
mhm.
got a different identifier because of the change of name.
Mm. Oh, are you talking about this example right here with the
Now
like
I'm
having
talking.
an ID?
Now I'm talking about your specific thing, which you just showed there about last two minor versions are supported.
Oh, okay.
And I'm saying, well, hold on a second. If you're trying to work out what are the two latest minor versions, number one, you need to know what is the latest version.
Hmm.
But also, if there's been a name change, um, you need to immediately prior to that latest
Hmm.
minor version, then
Yeah.
actually the one with the component with a different name is actually
Hmm.
still covered by that
Why would
two.
it still be covered? If it's renamed, it's a completely separate project with its own policies.
Is it?
I would say yes. It would need that if you did that and you wanted like, let's say the latest one on A and the latest, the only one on B, that you would have to modify the policy, like add a new policy that applies, or you would have to explicitly end support for N minus, the second one, and then define a new policy for project B. Like the point of the rename is to establish a link, but there's nothing shared between the projects in my mental model.
Hmm.
Implicitly anyway, right? If we come up with a way to explicitly share support policies, which I think would be awesome, then that they could share those. But but that's just the definitions. You know.
Hmm.
And hello, sorry for being late.
Yeah. No worries. So I think this dynamic policy It works really well when you have all of the release information readily available. So for example, like an NPM, like a package manager, a package registry, they have all the releases available. So if you have a policy defined, you can have the package managers generate the CLE in a sense for you, right?
I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess to some degree, I think that's right. There's going to be information that in the CLE that the package managers don't have, but you could certainly generate from the repository or from the registry, like a seriously high percentage of the CLE data, which is my current approach for building a script to build one for Node, and I'm going to do the same for NPM. So like, but there's always going to be some things, I think, because not everything's going to be programmatically in there, especially around support events and like LTS and stuff like that. But like, I also think just like with a Perl, you still need out of band information about the Perl type.
Right.
And you still need the ability to interrogate that ecosystem, which is going to be slightly different for each one.
Yeah, that's true.
And so like, I don't think it's even possible, whether it should be a goal is even a separate question, but like, I don't even think it's possible to have the CLE document be like all the information you need. It's just a currently missing piece.
Okay.
Right? Like the dependencies aren't in here. You still have an SBOM, right? Like, or the equivalent, who the access privileges, who has the ability to publish, that's not in here, but you'll need to get that from somewhere, to build a bigger picture.
Is it okay if we de-scope this dynamic policy stuff? It's something I just was kind of thinking about, but kind of adds a little too much complexity, I think, on our timeline.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say here is the count to, if you take that part out, the rest of it is a perfectly fine policy. It's just, it has to have an ID or something, but it would be explicitly assigned. Like you'd have to manually manage it, but like, that is the reason why I want shared policies, whether it's in a V1 or a V2 is fine, because then if a million projects have this as their policy, then they can all point to the same exact one. And then tooling can be built that hard codes that policy's rules.
Yeah.
And then you get the benefits of the dynamism without having the difficulty of defining it.
Right. So it's like, you could do it a layer up basically in the tooling. You define the dynamic policy, and then the CLE, all the events are generated, still exists. But
because the likelihood is that the vast majority of each ecosystem is going to share, like 95% of them are going to use the same 3 support policies or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know exactly, we'd have to like do research, but if we have a mechanism for sharing, then we can encourage people to point to some sort of canonical list of policies, which, then that would be the abstraction layer. And then all the tooling can understand those policies. And that's the incentive for projects pointing to that.
Yeah.
See you, Steve.
See you, Steve.
Yep. See you later. See Benji.
Am I the host? Okay, I am. Yeah, that makes sense.
Like, I think
it makes
so the sort of the progression I'm envisioning is, and we can, squish or stretch out these things, but one step is explicit policies, hard coded, not shareable. The next step is make them shareable. The next step is wait to see what people do with that. And then see if we can analyze an ecosystem and make a recommendation. And if we can do that, then we get everyone cohering on things. And then we may not even need the full dynamism, because we can just build into the spec directly. There can be built-in policies because we know what everyone is using, right? Like, and it may turn out that like the analysis says, oh, we do need the dynamism because it's too like, forked out or whatever. And if that's the case, then we have like raw data to inform how to design that.
Yeah. I think it makes sense to put this on the back burner for now, though. What do you
Cool.
think? Yeah.
So what you're saying
Okay.
is basically a very pragmatic approach.
Yeah, like I think so my personal priorities are like the first one is we must have a candidate ready to send to Ecma in time for the December GA. So I am happy to scope cut anything that gets in the way of that. And if we
Yeah.
achieve that, if let's say we have that next week, I am happy to scope creep as much as we want because we've already hit that bar, right?
Yeah.
But then separately is even though we have the ability to make breaking changes every 6 months and we have versioning, like it's still ideal if we never make a breaking change. And a good way to do that is to not over design in advance of adoption. But if we happen to, it's okay, right? Like, because we can just correct the mistake. But like, there will be a long tail of each version we come out with will exist in the wild. And so like, it's the same happens with major versions of open source software, right? Like there's lots of V1s and V2s, even if V3 has been the latest for a decade,
100%. Yeah, so that I think, yeah, let's table that.
Cool.
Before you joined, we were also talking about identifiers. Just wondering your
Okay.
thoughts here. I kind
Oh,
of posted
yeah.
in the Slack, but the two options. So we need some way of identifying what a component is, right?
From
Mapping
the
back,
document instead. Yeah.
yeah, mapping this wild data from an SBOM to the CLE in some way, right?
Yeah. That makes sense for first party and third party. That's a good missing piece to call out.
Yes, and so the two ways I was suggesting is first is having an identifiers top level, where you can add, new identifier aliases.
Ooh.
Okay.
Okay.
And then the second way, and this would not have any type of event associated with it or timestamps or anything. Maybe
Right.
we could add a timestamp in here. I don't know, but and then the other would be an actual event data, which is not really. It's not an event necessarily, but we could add it like this, and then the tooling would look at either the top level identifier or the component alias or the component renamed event in order to gather all the aliases for
Well, I
a
think
component.
renamed should like to echo what I said before, like
Yeah,
if you rename A to B, B's
Mhm.
events do not go in A's JSON file. They're distinct. You
but
can have a link in both directions, but
mm,
but it's a different, like, so if it's called A and it's called B, they are completely different projects. Even if they do the exact same thing and are maintained by the same team and run under the same policies, like
mm,
they're different projects. Like one's, one could be a fork of the other, one could be and it's totally, it's great to document that it was a rename, that you're supposed to stop
mhm,
using A and naturally move on to B. But like,
mhm,
if someone who's never used A shouldn't have
mhm,
to even see any references to the A pearls,
mhm.
except for maybe one to say, hey, this came from there.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of any edge cases here. I think I don't see any like technical limitations of using different CLE files once a component is renamed, other than losing that history
Right, which
and
is why I
knowing.
think it's important to have a backlink. Like,
Mhm,
in a component I think if a component is always renamed from one thing, then we can just have
mhm,
a top level field optional saying like renamed from, and that can be the pearl of the old one. And then you go track its CLE down, right?
mhm.
Oh, but
Well,
like if it's not
tech,
one-to-one, then we have to think more about it.
yeah, technically it would be a bunch of aliases in reality.
But like in this case, when you have the NPM, the gem, and the composer, those are
Yeah.
3 separate projects with 3 separate maintainer teams and 3 separate sets of support policies. So those are not aliases
Mm,
for each other necessarily. Like unless the Bootstrap project is actually running those, which I don't think they are,
yeah,
if it's just
yeah.
somebody wrapping them up, that's a
Mhm,
repackaging. That is a distinct project. Like everything in the
But
Ubuntu repo is not an official project. It's a repackage of it with a different team responsible for it.
But if you go to find information about, as a consumer, if you're looking at
Mhm.
Bootstrap, right?
Then it would be
There's
the
only one
Bootstrap
support
gem's
policy.
job to document that they explicitly choose to follow Bootstrap support policy, but that's not implicit or inherent.
Hmm.
They might choose to support Bootstrap 1 still,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or they might choose to not support anything and just say, nope, like talk to Bootstrap and we won't patch anything that they don't patch, right? Like
Mm.
that's up to the packaging team because they're forking the project.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I mean. As I don't think there are aliases. I think there's only one Perl for any project, period.
No, I think even
I guess actually, I guess that's not entirely true in the sense that
yeah.
like I could publish to NPM and to JSR, for
So
example, but
yeah.
but I would still think that there is a danger there that if there is ever a case where those things are not identical in every respect except the Perl, then I think they're different projects and we should specify, make a spec so that they can maximally share stuff when, they can point to the same support policies. They can, maybe we
Mm-hmm.
introduce an event type that says delegate all versions to this CLE file or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still a separate project that I think needs to be separately housed and discoverable.
But so all of these are coming from the same project maintainers, right?
Okay, so in this case they are, right?
And I'll give you
But
another example,
yeah.
actually.
Mhm.
One other example is
Well,
like
Bun NPM
Redis.
and Yarn is one Perl, but yeah.
Yeah.
Redis, okay.
Another is Redis, for example. You might install Redis on Debian or Alpine Linux, or
Mhm.
and you can have Perls that might just be like, you might get a generic Redis, you might get like Ubuntu Redis, you might get a Debian Redis, for example. And these are all the same. These are all from the same maintainers. All follow the same versioning policy. And all you would want to map back to understand what the support policy is for these. You know what I mean?
Right. No, yeah, I agree. And in this case, because they're the same maintainers, they will have the same policies, which is why sharing,
Yes.
which
Yes.
sharing would help with if they were in separate CLE files. But like the case where the repackages are
Mm-hmm.
all have identical everything, same maintainer,
Mm-hmm.
same support policy, etc. I think that is a specialized subset of the common or of the broader possibilities, of which that's one option, but another option is that other folks are doing the repackaging. So like
Yes.
there's an NVM on AUR for Arch
Mm-hmm.
Linux, but I don't
Mm-hmm.
manage it. They do. And
Hmm.
they of course may choose to delegate all their, to follow all of
Right.
my own support policies, but
Mm-hmm.
that's their choice to make. And they like creating two possibilities would
Mm-hmm.
also mean what happens if I then define the AUR NVM as an alias?
Mm-hmm.
Have I just taken control of their support policy? How do they define it for themselves? And so why would
Yeah.
we allow that to even be possible when if we disallow it, the only
Mm-hmm.
extra cost is you have to add a couple extra JSON files, assuming that we
Mm-hmm.
get the delegation and deferment pieces
Mm-hmm.
correct, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Like I'd much rather end up in a world where Bootstrap has 3 files, 2 of which have like 20 lines of boilerplate that point to the original one, and
Mm-hmm.
then live in a world where we have to disambiguate between multiple competing sources of truth.
But
And
I
that,
think you'll
yeah,
have
go ahead.
multiple competing sources of truth regardless, no?
The package itself should be the
Okay.
authoritative pointer to its CLE, and
Okay.
nothing should be allowed to compete with that. Like that it needs to be
Mm-hmm.
specified as the authority. And
Okay.
like,
Yes, this does work, but only for within like package registries, basically, right? But if
not
you're
necessarily. Like
okay,
what something I still have on my plate is to audit a bunch of different ecosystems and come up with a recommendation essentially
yeah,
for how each ecosystem should point to its CLE file. And for the package registries that all have a manifest file, it's going to be in there
mhm,
somewhere.
mhm,
But Go doesn't have that. Maybe they
yeah,
have a Go file that I don't know anything about Go. Maybe they have
yeah.
like a file for that, in which case it can go there. But like, I don't know.
But I'm
Yeah,
I'm talking more
if
about
there's
like
something where they don't have a,
commercial. I'm talking
yeah,
about like commercial software, like Microsoft or Sophos or Broadcom or
and I think that for
um,
those,
Steve's company.
what do their pearls look like? There's something
Um,
custom or proprietary probably.
yep.
And so
The pro.
if they're doing that, they'll have to come up with their own convention for that pearl
Yes.
type, and that's okay. And that can be it's at this URL, that can be it's in the dot well known, that can be this GitHub repo, like
Mm-hmm.
but that's endemic on them to define their private proprietary ecosystem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Define the conventions for it.
Hmm.
So like there's no getting around that tooling has to hard code rules for every Perl type that it supports. Hopefully
Mm-hmm.
that is really trivial work, right? It's just grab a field out of a manifest, right? But it doesn't have, or append something to a URL, right? But like,
Mm-hmm.
but you're never going to just be able to generically support things unless each, unless you separately design some sort of standard for all of these ecosystems to define all their things that they have in common. But like, that's a much bigger type of problem.
Yeah. I'll give you another example.
Sure.
Like you might have a composer, you might have a SBOM generator that gives you a Perl value like this.
Mhm. Where am I looking? I'm seeing your GitHub
Oh,
bootstrap.
sorry. For example, this one.
Mhm.
And like, let's say it's exactly the same Docker image that you're scanning with an SBOM generator.
Okay.
And another SBOM generator might throw out the Perl that's like this.
So in those cases, it's sure, maybe those are identical, right? But like, is that enough of a common case and enough of a penalty to not allow the aliases to be worth the complexity of it? And the answer might be yes, it might be worth it, right?
That in my opinion, the answer is yes. Like
Okay.
basically you need to support aliases of some kind because and I know maybe you're generating a CLE per kind of distribution method, but there will still be like a significant number of edge cases in the real world
Well,
that you'll just be like, we need.
but
Yeah.
like on Composer, why
Mhm.
is it allowed that there's two things, like two
This
edge
is not
specifiers?
this is not on Composer though, for example.
Oh,
This
okay.
this is a Perl that's generated from like Sift or something like that. And what the SBOM generators do, Sift, for example,
Mhm.
Sift will look at specific files. Like, okay, if it's reading an npm packages, it'll
Mhm.
go and it'll look at your package.json or your package lock.json, and we'll try and pull out all the packages that exist in those, right? And
Right.
for different I don't know Composer that well, but like for different ecosystems, there's different ways of reading and figuring out which packages exist in this Docker image that we're looking at, right? And so it's all, and it can be really easy to read. Package JSON is super easy to read. It can be
Right.
very,
It
or
could
there
be
can be
requirements.txt. Yeah.
heuristics. For example, Sift has binary heuristic identifiers. So you see a
Okay.
binary, it will read the binary file. For Redis, for example, I know because I've done pull requests for this. It will
Mhm.
look at the binary file for Redis and it will find, oh, this is a Redis binary, and this is the version of Redis that exists on this Docker.
But like, if the Perl it creates,
Mm-hmm.
like the point of Perls is that for a given Perl type,
Yeah.
everyone it does it the same way.
No, that's not true though.
But like what the U doesn't work in Perl. It's not universal if that's not true. Like
For example,
we shouldn't be using Perls if that's not true, is what I would say.
for example, like Sift might generate a Perl like this when it finds a Redis
Is
binary.
generic though? Generic's a catch-all.
Generic is a valid Perl type. Yeah.
Okay, so what are the rules for generic?
Um,
How do I, if it's generic / foo, how do I find foo? And if there's not an answer to that question, then it's not possible to do it programmatically. And that's just why they shouldn't use generic. And if it is possible to do, then that
Right.
should answer the question of disambiguation.
but
Like
yeah.
that's like the design of Perls, is that like each type has rules so that you can write tooling for that type. And that's the reason why it's worth using. And if you pick a type and don't have rules for that type that are programmatically useful, then you've just done a dumb thing and picked a type that no one's going to use because it's not toolable.
I'll give you another example.
And I don't know anything about generic, by the way. I'm like, these are questions.
Yeah, I'll give you another example.
Sure.
So for example, let's say we're running, I don't know, what's a good example? Like Postgres, actually.
Mhm.
So we've installed a Postgres binary. One SBOM generator might do this.
Mhm.
One SBOM generator might do this, for example.
But how
And
is
it's
Postgres
entirely,
going to know what all the SBOM generators do?
it doesn't.
Right. So it can't.
Right.
So therefore, the project can't put this stuff in the CLE file because that has to be something that the SBOM creator announces or figures out a way to do the mapping for. And that's a coordination problem that
But
we can't solve. And
yes,
maybe the way to solve it is to have them all agree for popular projects what Perls they produce. Maybe it's not. Maybe they need to make a registry and say, and for Postgres, it's actually pointing
yeah.
to this project, and for PostgreSQL, it's pointing to this
Mm-hmm.
project. But that's not
Mm-hmm.
something that the CLE author here can do
Mm-hmm.
because they
Mm-hmm.
don't have an exhaustive inventory in their head of tooling.
Correct.
So it
I'm
can't
just
come
giving
from this file, right?
I'm just giving examples of like how would you make the CLE maximally useful? And these are
Right.
like these are basically like real world examples of stuff that does happen. And if I'm
Yeah,
someone
yeah.
that's generating an SBOM and I'm like, I want to find out what the lifecycle information is for Postgres, how do I do that? We can say, oh, it's just the way that it is, and it'll never work.
Well,
You could also have aliases though, and people could make PRs to a project saying, hey, in my
that's true.
environment, I noticed that this Perl existed for Postgres. Can we add it into the CLE, for example, as an alias?
So, okay. So I agree that you are describing real world problems
Mm-hmm.
that exist.
Mm-hmm.
That what you've just described is a way that
Mm-hmm.
those problems could be hacked around.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like the better solution would be to file an issue on the SBOM tool and say, can you make a useful Perl here instead of this one that nothing understands?
But
And that seems a better outcome for the ecosystem than proliferating a bunch of random, like 50 different variations that because there's 50 tools out there that did something their own
mm-hmm.
way. It seems better
Mm-hmm.
to, instead of shifting the burden on the maintainer to accept these PRs, that we should shift the
Mm-hmm.
burden onto the tooling to fix their own sloppiness.
It's you reference CIF because in dependency track we get so many people who are generating bombs using CIF, and then it causes problems in dependency track because they've got this oddity in behavior. Oh, they do it this way, and it's
Mm-hmm.
And if dependency trap works around it, or if we work around it, then everyone's going to have to solve the same problem multiple times. If CIF fixes it, then it's fixed.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes total sense.
So like based on that philosophy, I would argue we shouldn't even try to solve it because it's not ours to solve, it's theirs.
Mm-hmm.
So I would envisage that you'd get some integration with things like dependency track, and then you'll get a whole bunch of people using dependency track and saying, "Oh, this is crap," and then they'll be logging issues with tools like CIF to say, "Hey, can you do better?"
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I know what you're saying.
And I say dependency track because we've just gone over 3,000 deployments that we know about.
Hmm.
That's the latest version.
Hmm. Hmm.
The trouble is, we're not going to actually know how much of a problem this is until people start to actually use it, are we?
Right. And that is highlighting the let's like not solve a problem that we don't have the data for yet, right? Like
Mhm.
it may everything that each of us dislikes and has caused to get pulled out like might end up being something that we desperately should have put in and we need, right? And then we put it in the next version, right? That's not an excuse to be sloppy with our design, but it's it's a correction mechanism if we make a mistake.
Mhm.
And like if we think we need aliases, that's something that can be added,
Hmm.
right? Like if
So,
even if we had a top level single field, we can just say, cool, either a top level single field or a plural field that has multiples. And then in a non-breaking way, we've supported both forms, right? So
Mhm.
like so that's like the worst case of we do need it and we didn't put it in the beginning.
Yeah. So what were you thinking around, like, for example, these multiple valid distribution methods for Bootstrap?
I mean, I think if they have 3 different pearls, I think they have 3 CLE files. And I think that
Mhm.
that it's okay if that is triple the work every time they do releases, both because
Mhm.
they can write tooling and because like we need to see exampled in the wild before we, I think, design a way to delegate, right? Because like also if in fact like the reality is that their releases are going to be different too. The
Mhm.
timestamps will be different, even if the versions are the same and the dates are the same, right? One of them might be at 11:59 and the other at 12:01. Like,
Mhm.
you know, they have to have separate release events anyway. So what's like, why would we want to triple the size of this file
Mhm.
when most people are only going to care about the NPM package? And the people who only care about the Ruby package don't care what you put on NPM. They only want to see the gems events.
Mhm.
So it's like, at that point, the only shared pieces are the support policies, which if we make them shareable now or later, then we can remove some of their boilerplate. But like that's not a
Mhm.
hardship more than once per variation.
Or you have a separate file that's just the releases. Oh, I guess you would need it for each ecosystem. Never mind.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I think that point about timestamps is very valid. Yeah, you'll get a different CLE file. And you also said, and your tooling will generate each individual CLE file. Again, it should not actually be, a real rod for someone's back.
Mhm.
With tooling, it will just basically happen. 3, 4, 5 CLEs.
Yeah.
Once you got your first one, you basically know how to do every single subsequent one.
Yeah. And they'll just be instead of having a top level file, you'll make a folder and it'll have files in it. And you'll
Hmm.
point to the file instead. I mean, like if like again, I'm totally open if we're sure that is a hardship and that it's valuable enough to squish things together, then we can allow that in the future and should. But I don't think I don't think a convincing case has been made that it's critically important to have it in the first version. And I think we have time to figure that out later.
Yes.
Hmm.
Now, there's so many sort of useful things which have been said. Is it
Mhm.
going to be value to say, right, we've got this sort of schema, it's the MVP, it's a version 1, ready by September, blah, 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 blah. And there's a whole pile of stuff that it doesn't actually cover. And there's a whole pile of things where somebody looking at it might have questions like, oh, why didn't they put in support for aliases, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
But then you can have a separate document, which is basically like an FAQ to say, these are sort of considerations that you might want to think about. These are behaviors or sort of things that you might want to look for, so that it can provide feedback for future work
Well, and I
or
think
for improvement.
like we have a scenarios folder. I think you're exactly right. I think what we should do is eventually have two folders. One is real projects that we're documenting as exemplars. The other is contrived scenarios that is like a cookbook that if someone in general doesn't know what to do, they can look at that and be like, oh, I'm kind of like this project with this plan. And so then I can follow what they've done. And then what, that's basically the FAQ. It's like we can describe all the use cases, be like, like wizard style, like I have a monorepo with 4 projects in it. What do I do? I renamed A to B. I distribute A on 4 other places with the same support policies. Like we can cover all those and explain it. So I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. And all of it separate from the actual schema, which is what's going to be improved.
Right. Yeah. Just alongside the schema, right? So it's we can convey authority without having it for like that's what I'm talking about, like ecosystem recommendations. We can't mandate that ever, but like
Yeah.
but if the official place for the spec tells people what we suggest, that's just what everyone's going to do, and then it won't have like multiple variations.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a good thing, right? Is the freedom to do whatever the hell you want, but the like minimizing how often that happens.
Cool.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I'm just thinking about the identifier still.
Yeah, no, that's fine. But I think one way or the other, there must be at least one Perl present in near the top of the CLE file. I don't think we should have the events for it because I think that it's not going to happen that frequently, and
Mm-hmm.
people already when they do the streaming iterative parsing, they're going to have to start at the
Mm-hmm.
top and move down to events anyway. So they're already going to have parsed the identifiers.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we decide we need events, we can add them, but like I'm skeptical about having 2 sources of truth, meaning anything that I can read all the events and derive probably shouldn't be duplicated in the front matter, and vice versa.
Hmm.
It might happen, but like as soon as that happens, you've got 2 things to keep up to date. So either you should be able to pull the aliases out of the events without having it explicitly documented, or you should be able to get it from the top is my instinct.
Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to find some other examples of pearls in the wild.
Yeah. Like I mean, I agree. There's definitely going to be many examples of multiple pearls that have the same maintainers, support policies, and version numbers. That
Mhm.
happens, but it doesn't happen like. But it's like I think that is just a special case of they're 2 separate projects that share support policies and maintainers. Right? Like I have 500 projects that will share maintainers and support policies, but they're all different projects, right? And so I need 500 CLE files for them.
Here's an example. Bitnami
Mhm.
packages etcd into a Docker image. And it's a specific version of etcd, but the Perl that you get when you scan it is like this.
Mhm. But Bitnami has their own support policy for it. And the real etcd is one of their dependencies. Like now their real support policy might be whatever etcd says, but that's still their policy, and they can change that.
but as a user, you know what I mean? Like as a user.
Yeah, no, it's an extra hop for you
No, no,
or
no.
your tooling to figure out what the support policy would be if you do that.
Definitely like they're like realistically, is Bitnami going to create a support policy for this Docker image that they released?
No, realistically, they're not.
Probably not, right? And as a
But
consumer,
if
it's like I just want to know, map back this Docker image that contains etcd back to.
and then the consumer demand will suggest that Bitnami adds the tooling to do that, to create the CLE files, just like they would for any project that's lacking it. And if Docker Hub starts showing CLE information directly on the image pages, then they already have a natural incentive to do it. So I'll add that to my list of reach outs. I'm meeting with a PyPI person hopefully next week.
If I'm understanding things right, wouldn't you have a thing where sort of Bitnami could have its own support policy, but
Correct.
probably don't?
Yeah.
But if it doesn't, shouldn't that then be assumed that the lack of a support policy can be basically taken as a statement that it does defer back to the original project?
And I think that is an event type or a top level front matter fielder fields that like that we may want to add. Do we need to add it in the first version or not? I don't know. But even if we don't, we can add it in the second version. But yeah, like that. And if we added that, that reduces the boilerplate, right? Instead of having their tool spit out 2 files or, or spit out a file automatically, they can just maybe make a hard coded 20-line file that they never need to touch again. Right. Although they probably they'd still need to generate events because the Docker image gets published at different timestamps than etcd. So they're going to be generating it anyway. And if they do, then it's not really, it's just whether it's this big or this big, if it repeats the support policies or points to them. And it's good that we work to make it this big, but like, that's not critical, right? Go ahead.
What about this, where you have like an operating system package, like MongoDB?
Yeah. I think that Debian, CentOS, Ubuntu, all of those that have their own policies around it and their own timestamps.
But the actual software though, like MongoDB org server,
one would hope, but most
Debian's
things
not supporting that, right?
Correct.
Debian is not
Debian
supporting.
only supports their own, but it's not the same software as the real one or the source necessarily. Debian or Ubuntu wraps ships Node, and it's not the right Node. It's like a broken version of it.
Really?
Yeah, no, the Node.js, if you apt install Node.js, it's broken. Like, unless you install it from a third party's file, right? Like repackagers, they're making a different new project and they want it. The goal hopefully is to make it as close to the same as possible, but they are on the hook for their own repackaging. And if they don't want to be, they don't repackage it. This is why I tell people to only install software through official distribution channels, never install anything repackaged, but it's obviously not always an option.
Hold on, you're saying that in my environment where we were on CentOS this time, like a year ago, now end of life, moving to Ubuntu, you might have actually had a way of getting, say, Mongo, sort of something onto that CentOS, which worked, where trying to do exactly the same thing under Ubuntu actually will now fail.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, in practice, it may not, and hopefully it doesn't. But like, yeah, if you're, whenever you install something, the party who distributes it, or puts it there for distribution rather, is the ones on the hook. And if they've made any changes to it, of any kind, even to make it work, then they have potentially introduced bugs and they have to have their own support policy. And that support policy might be like, we'll follow all the same version support that the real project does, but we'll also make sure it still works on CentOS or whatever. But that's their own distinct policy that they're on the hook for. And like, it's correct that tooling differentiates between those two things. Because if you install it from CentOS instead of, like if you install Node from apt instead of from, nodejs.org, like you have introduced a supply chain risk because you are not installing Node, you're installing an Ubuntu flavor of Node. And maybe that's acceptable for your business, but you need that exists, and it shouldn't be papered over by trying to say that the apt version is an alias, because it's not. It's its own thing.
But that's also very important. At the end of the day, it doesn't actually matter if everything works. You have to know,
Yep.
For the purpose of compliance reporting and stuff, where everything came from, and that
Correct.
you've got two different systems. Actually, they're not the same flavor. They are different.
Yeah. Exactly right. They may in practice be basically the same, but if they've changed one bit, they are different projects. They're different software, and you need to treat them differently. And when I say bit, in the byte sense.
Yeah.
In other words, if anybody is installing my software, my NPM package is not from NPM, they can go to hell. That's the only way I support it, is if they install it from NPM. They're welcome to pay me a lot of money to support something else, but like, I will only offer support for the distribution mechanisms that I choose to use. People install an NVM with Homebrew. I don't support that. I got them to put a message in the bottle when you install it, brew install NVM, that says it's not supported. And if they file an issue, I tell them to remove it and install it the right way, because the brew version has different behavior.
Hmm.
There's a lot of food for thought in what's just been discussed in the last 5-10 minutes.
What was that? Oh yeah, a lot. Yeah. True.
I know what you're saying, but at the same time, I think it greatly it just kills the effectiveness of the CLE for any type of non-open source package project.
I think the difference with end-of-life.date is a third party. So it makes sense that they have a list of all these things. But the project's official CLE file is a first party, and they can't and shouldn't try to know about everything. Like, they only know about the things they're responsible for. And so it may be that we do in fact need a way to say, given this Perl, what are all of the other variations of it too? But that knowledge can't live in the project itself. That knowledge shouldn't be mandated to or made easy to be in the project's CLE file. Maybe it's next door to it. Maybe they keep a list of aliases, right? Maybe we add an optional thing that says these are third-party aliases that you may want to look into with no implied endorsement. But like, maybe we could do that, but that's like, but they still all need to have their own CLEs regardless.
Yeah. I know that it's you're right technically.
Best kind of correct.
But yeah, I just think if we would do that, then the CLE is basically next to useless.
I mean, it sounds like
for non-open source projects. Like, I think that this aliasing is like a critical part of being able to find software and things that are end of life.
Well, for non-open source projects, we're already talking about version 2. And as far as basically useless, if the state of the world is that people can't even get consistent Perls out of their tooling, then it's useless anyway. Like, if you have no guarantee that these, like, maybe these are the only Perls that will ever be made for them, but like, if RPM/Nginx appears, like, yeah, maybe you can discover that and PR it in, but like, you don't want to be on a whack-a-mole hunt forever trying to capture every stupid mistake somebody makes or every unwise choice, right? Like, so like, you're already going to have to figure out a way to map your question mark Perl to something useful. And if you can do that, you can get it to the real one.
Mhm.
Like in other words, I think it's important that the problem you're describing be solvable. It's not a given, I think, that it's solvable in CLE or should be solved in CLE. And it's unclear how we would exactly do that in a way that sets things up. It has pits of success instead of pits of failure.
Mhm.
And if it turns out that it becomes clear that there's a way in CLE to do it, we should add that. And we can at any point. But like, yeah, I see a lot of hazards going down this route, and I don't see that many benefits yet.
Mhm. Well, I think we're at time, but
Okay. Yeah, we
or
should
we're
talk
over
more about it
time.
next time. Yeah,
But yeah, we should talk about it next time.
cool.
Yeah,
Are you
we
stressed
definitely
out,
should.
Ben?
What was that?
I was asking Benji, are you a bit stressed out now?
Oh no, I'm okay. I'm okay. I
Cool.
just think I think it is fundamental, this aliasing of some kind.
The aliasing or aliasing in the MVP of CLE?
CLE, I think we're just going for open source for MVP technically.
Yeah.
So not super useful there, I think, because the pearls that are generated are usually very consistent. But for non-open source projects that don't live on a package registry of some kind, then, you know, there's a multitude of pearls that exist for it.
Right.
So aliasing is important. But yeah, okay,
Okie dokie.
we'll chat next time. Thank you guys. Good discussion.
Right.
Thank you. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.